Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unauthorized Disclosure weekly podcast. We have a special show for you today, but first, I want to encourage you to become a supporter of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. Subscribe. You can do this over at patreon.com/unauthorized disclosure, or you can go to the Dissenter newsletter at thedissenter.org and become a subscriber at the podcast level. Simply support the Unauthorized Disclosure show. Now, I have two guests. Their names are Juan Betancourt and Larry Hebert. They're both senior airmen in the United States military. And before we get to their interviews, I must make clear, just because they are coming forward and objecting to the genocidal violence in Gaza at risk of retaliation, and they're going through a process where they seek conscientious objector status. And I am grateful that both gave me their time to sit down and talk with them for around a half hour each, or a little less. I put their interviews together into this episode for you that is being shared. I must make clear that they did not disclose any classified information or anything sensitive related to operations that they may be involved in or have knowledge about. I kept it to what they're doing, the act of resistance in which they're engaged, and how they fit into that tradition of military dissent. And so I'm pleased to be able to share this episode this week. It's different. Normally there's one person who would be on the show, but it made sense to pair their interviews together in one episode. And I didn't really feel like sitting on Larry's interview or Juan's interview and then releasing them separately over the next couple of weeks. I wanted to put it out now because it was about a week or 10 days ago that I posted a page at the Dissenter newsletter, Tracking Dissent, that has the names of civilians as well as military officers, so former government employees, former U.S. officials who have resigned, as well as people who have resigned from or left the U.S. military. That's what Larry and Juan are both trying to do, and they're in this club of honorable people, men, women of conscience, who have stepped forward and objected to the unwavering support that the U.S. military has shown for the Israeli military as it bombs Gaza, starves the entire Palestinian population in Gaza, rounds them up, puts them in prison, tortures them, commits all sorts of abuses, attacks hospitals, destroys critical infrastructure. You can run down the list of crimes and atrocities that have been committed. These are the people who have stepped forward and said, no, we do not endorse this. This is not something that I want to be a part of at all as a government official or a military officer. And so it was important to me to bring Larry and Juan on the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. These aren't voices that have been out there in the media as much as some of the other former government officials. But at some point, maybe I'll have a chance to connect with other figures who have distinguished themselves as dissenters. For now, on the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, I'm pleased to share with you first the interview with Juan Betancourt, and then the interview with Larry Hebert. And then we'll come back and I'll wrap up both of their interviews. I'm joined today by Juan Betancourt, who is a senior airman and also seeking conscientious objector status in the U.S. military. So thanks for joining, Juan.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
And I'm having you to discuss what's been unfolding with Israel's bombardment and assault on Gaza over the last 9+ months, and in particular, the aspect of soldiers in the US military or officers in the US military who are trying to figure out what their role should be as this plays out. And you decided to apply within the military for conscientious objector status. So, can you share with people what made you decide to do this?
Yes, of course. So I started having doubts, an internal moral struggle way before October 7th and the genocidal onslaught that we have all witnessed since then. Ever since I finished my tech school, I began to have apprehensions about my participation in the military, the ultimate goal of the military, and I began to again question my participation and the ultimate goal of war, which is to kill our fellow human beings. I now think and believe, in a large regards, I'm trying to tell the world that there's better, more peaceful, more diplomatic ways in which we can solve conflicts, and that war ultimately, and most of the time, of course, stands for the most heinous of agendas, and it's it's illogical to continue this inhumane practice in order to solve our differences. I think there's a better way for humanity to solve our differences, whether that is between individuals or between nations.
And if I'm correct, there was an interview that you gave where you spoke about how this has been something you've seen through smartphones, or we've been seeing a lot of everyone shared this, and I share this as well, how just distraught it is, and we should feel this way as there's constant photos and videos of the daily violence. Um, can you say a bit about what it's been like to see it on like a phone or on the internet?
I mean, every single day is overwhelming sense of despair, of helplessness, and also moral disgust at our government's complicity in this genocide, in this ethnic cleansing. And it also reveals the true nature of international law. It's we've always known that it's sort of a facade and um, you know applies to certain nations while it doesn't apply to others. But again, it should be a safeguard nonetheless, and we're seeing that being made a mockery of while we are witnessing a live genocide being live streamed by Palestinians, and yet you still have large segments of American society and its political class denying that this is happening in various ways. So it's a feeling of despair, of helplessness, but also of deep anger at our political class, which could stop this with just a phone call.
And then Juan, can you so obviously I just want you to speak about things that you can say publicly, but when you entered the military, I'm certain because every person who enters the military has their own ideas, or maybe they don't know a whole lot about what's going on with the United States and the way that they support the Israeli government. Uh, but I'm interested in maybe what you have been able to learn as somebody in the US military.
So I knew somewhat about our support and um, alliance with Israel, but one thing is to understand this matters, and I always say this through a geopolitical academic lens, and one thing is through an experiential lens. Now, my mission did not directly aid the IDF, but during the course of the genocide, there were several reports that displayed and threw into sharp. There were several reports that revealed the intimacy between our government and the IDF. And no, I was not expecting for our government to go this far into aiding and abetting a genocide. However, now that I'm a little bit more educated on the matter, particularly this administration's record, I see that the writing was on the wall. And that also, has to do with the current government of Israel, which is absolutely fascistic and openly taunting and galvanizing for an ethnic cleansing.
And could you get into this process for applying to be a conscientious objector. What does that entail for somebody like you if you would like to do that?
Right. So it's a long process. It entails a package of different essays in which you're asked about your beliefs, how those beliefs change, because of course the Department of Defense wants to know how this change of perspective came about. So these essays are an attempt to sort of portray a narrative in which the member spells out how that change of attitude, that call of conscience, came to be. And then there's also within the package a series of supporting letters and a sort of a quick biography on the member. And then from that, it goes to our command, and the commander appoints actually an investigative officer, which conducts an interview with my leadership, my peers, in order to, again, ascertain in a very bureaucratic way that the member is genuine and truthful about their change of conscience, and then from there it goes to the Secretary of the Air Force. So it goes all the way to the Pentagon, and there is adjudicated. And conscious objectors, for those that don't know, you can either request to be separated from the military completely or to be reassigned in non-combatant role. I am of the former. I am asking to be separated from the military because I can no longer, in good conscience, continue to serve an institution whose ultimate goal is to wage war.
And I just want to emphasize that it does take a long time. So there are potentially officers or soldiers in the military who have pursued conscientious objector status months ago and are waiting, like you, to figure out what the military will do, correct?
Correct. I think the last number I checked was 40 plus
Oh,
members have
wow.
sought conscious objectors, and the majority of them have cited Gaza as a not as a direct cause, but as an element that made them reconsider their participation. But again, we hope that more members speak out against this war. I am not in any way trying to herald a large movement of conscious objectors by any means. I'm just trying to sort of awaken our conscience and educate fellow Americans, especially fellow service members, about the horrors that the Palestinian people have undergone the last 75 years with the aiding and abetting of the United States government.
As you are doing this work, there's another component I understand. You are involved with Veterans for Peace and the Appeal for Redress campaign, which is I don't know, the latest cycle of appealing for redress. And the effort is to have members in the military, I think without leaving, correct, be able to contact representatives and senators in the US Congress so that they can understand that soldiers are opposed to this violence. Can you speak about this campaign?
Right. So, Appeal for Redress version 2 is actually inspired by the first Appeal for Redress, which came out in 2006 in the wake of the highly unpopular and criminal invasion of Iraq, in which service members directly wrote to the representatives, in which they expressed their moral outrage and dissent at the decision to invade Iraq. So this campaign is similar, but it is geared towards a call for a ceasefire, a halt in the transfers of weapons to the state of Israel, and for a call for justice for all victims of the conflict. So yeah, it is a campaign uh, championed by Veterans for Peace, in which members can go directly to Veterans for Peace. They can find the appeal, and then they'll see 5 to 4 different templates that sort of match the language and the tone that they want to convey to their elected officials, and then that's sent to the elected officials. So, no, you do not have to resign from the military, claim conscious objector status. This is within the right. This is constitutionally protected speech, and it's actually quite normal for service members to write to the representatives. But we want to take advantage of that civic right and duty to voice our concerns, because so often service members are used as pawns in the game of American politics, and we will not be silent as we watch a genocide unfold, and also a conflict that can very easily spill over into a wider regional war in which American troops can, unfortunately be called upon to fight again. And so, yeah, that's the sort of thrust of the campaign.
As you say, usually these are going to be decisions that are made by those in the executive branch, the legislative branch. They'll speak, and there's no input from the soldiers who are going to be deployed. And so, one thing I would like to have you speak to is when you are a soldier who is speaking to a member of Congress, you have to be careful about what you do. I know you made a mention in your statement as you were endorsing this appeal for redress that there's a limit that you have in your right to dissent when you take your oath as a soldier. I was curious, like what sort of limits do you have to be careful or mindful of as somebody in the military?
Well, I think the most important ones is to have a respectful tone. At the end of the day, this is the civilian leadership, and if it's directed at the commander as chief, one has to be respectful. One cannot conduct any sort of political protest while wearing a uniform, and one cannot compromise national security, divulge, uh, sensitive information. But besides that, members are also protected by the First Amendment, and they can voice their concerns, even opinions about policy. They must do so as civilians, not in their capacity as an airman or as a soldier or as a seaman. So you will see in a lot of my interviews, I always begin with that my opinions are reflective of my personal beliefs and not those of the Department of Defense or the Air Force, in order to make that distinction. So there's no legal issues involving, political speech.
And then like the risk of retaliation for somebody as you personally, apply for conscientious objector status, there is that's supposed to be a protected act by somebody in the military, or are you led to fear that there can be some retaliation for seeking this status?
So I can only speak about my experience, so it's
Yeah.
anecdotal. But I have not received any retaliation. In fact, my leadership has been sort of, welcoming and accommodating, but I've also been very transparent with them about my beliefs and what am I going to say before an interview. But I know that's not the case. I know some members, that are seeking this route are going to be shunned, and that there's going to be, some sort of pugnacious environment around their resignation. So I think it depends on the unit. I think it depends on the branch. But in general, though, the atmosphere is one of it's shunned upon to criticize. We enlisted, we took an oath to the Constitution to follow orders. So any form of dissent and any sort of form of moral outcry is seen as a dereliction of duty. But again, this is all protected by our Constitution. By Constitution is enshrined, and we have the freedom of conscience, and we want to exercise it as such. And in the meantime, speak against this unspeakable carnage that's taking place.
As you mentioned, this is part of a tradition. So this goes back to soldiers who were contacting members of Congress during Iraq. What you're a part of here is some part of the history of resistance and dissent within the military. I think we could extend it as far back, at least as far as the way the armed forces are understood today. You could probably take it as far back to the Vietnam War, when it was crucial for soldiers to be speaking out for their own safety and interests.
So I feel incredibly honored to follow the footsteps of those brave conscious objectors, which actually date back to the Revolutionary War. And those are the members that have, through sacrifice and, struggle, carved the ability for members like Larry, Hebert, and I right now to speak out and to claim this status as such. So it's a sense of honor. It's also a sense of duty, because ultimately, beyond our political beliefs, the geopolitical situation that we find ourselves, ultimately ours is a call of conscience. It is something that has to do with us as human beings, and it has to do with the core beliefs of all conscious objectors: is that we object to war, we object to our participation in any form of warfare, and that's really at the core of what we stand for. And I think that's a belief and a message that needs to be protected, especially in times of warmongering and times where we're kind of blindly marching into World War III. I think we need to awaken our conscience towards an anti-war posture and to say we will not be complicit. We will not, we will not partake in this practice any longer. So I want to make that distinction between sort of uh, political inclinations and political commitments that we might have, and sort of religious, spiritual, philosophical beliefs that are forged from our experience as military members, and that have led us to say, not anymore. I don't want to do this. I'm completely against what's taken place and what we stand for.
Finally, I'm mostly interested in how you experienced it as somebody enlisted in the military, but I've noticed I'll just broadly refer to them as dissenters, or a few of them are whistleblowers. They've come from the civilian context and also the US military. And there's like 12 or 15 at this point who've really been making the rounds doing interviews like yourself. And several of them were heavily impacted by the act that Aaron Bushnell took outside of the Israeli embassy. And so I didn't want to let you go without taking a moment to ask what it was like for you to see this happen, and maybe just generally speaking, what was going on as you and your colleagues tried to process that somebody had taken this act. And I would imagine that for a lot of soldiers, this was really when they started to think of the idea of conscientious objection.
So absolutely, for me, it was incredibly personal because although I didn't know Aaron, he was stationed here in San Antonio, actually in my same unit. And for months now, I had, prior to his self-immolation on the 25th of February, I had been speaking out to my leadership. I had written letters to Congress, and I made it clear in these letters that if I were assigned a mission that directly aided the IDF, I would refuse legal orders. So even from there, I had a sense of dissent towards our posture, uh, what was going on in Gaza. And yeah, it was an incredibly moving moment. We all took stock of what was going on, and we saw this act of sincerity, of clarity, but also an act of despair in order to shift our gaze towards the horrors that were taking place in Palestine. And so I went to his memorial here in Lackland, and I was saddened by the fact that neither his leadership or his colleagues mentioned Palestine in the entire service. It was, quite intentional. There was a sense of, we want to be focused on the grieving process. But I think that an act of that magnitude, he gave his life for the message that he was trying to, you know, uh, portray through such an extreme act, that it was completely silenced from the memorial service. So I took it upon myself as a sort of duty to Aaron to leave a small Palestinian flag in his visual table as a sign of, at least the presence, at least the Palestinian flag, the presence of Palestine was in his memorial service. So it was incredibly personal. And since then, it was a turning point. I started speaking out further, more publicly, and then soon after, a couple of months from that, I decided to become a conscious objector. Uh, again, just seeing the situation unfolding, and also battling those internal apprehensions that I was struggling with months prior to that. So
Thank you, Juan, for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. I'm here with Larry Hebert. who is a senior airman in the U.S. military seeking conscientious objector status. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
When did you decide that you wanted to seek conscientious objector status? What was the catalyst for you? I mean, obviously, I'm having you on to speak about the 9+ months of genocidal violence in Gaza, but can you speak to when you recognized that you wanted to leave the military?
I haven't been immensely fond of the how the military is set up and kind of how it functions. But it wasn't until about right after October 7th, less than a week after, when I actually found out what was going on and saw the ground footage of civilians being hit. That's when I knew immediately, like, I couldn't continue serving and I had to get out. At that point, I was considering retraining into a different career field within the military, or even just extending my contract and going back to the States. But yeah, once I saw that and saw what was going on and how we were involved, I knew I had to get out, and I pretty much immediately contacted the GI Rights Hotline, which I was directed to by Military One Source, and I got in touch with the Quaker House and eventually the Center on Conscience No More, and they tried to put me through the process for conscientious objector status, which at the time when they told me about it, I thought it was a great idea, but I didn't think that I would qualify because I didn't have a fully developed like understanding of what that entailed and what being anti-war was.
And would you say that that's changed? That now you have a more solid grounding objection to the role that you were playing?
Yeah, so that was that initial, thinking about conscientious objection that started in October, November timeframe. By the time I went to DC in March and April, and I started actually researching about other conscientious objectors, other wars, studying more of the industry, the military industrial complex, and kind of what all the motivation behind warfare is. And after kind of going through all of that, it was pretty easy for me to actually come to that conclusion that yeah, this is absolutely wrong, and this is solely just a benefit and get more get the wealthy, the ruling class, the billionaires more money and to profit off of it.
Right, that like rich man's war concept, that this is
Yeah.
being done for those who are elites and that the people who are on the lower rungs don't provide any input when it comes to like at the missions or the wars that are being chosen. So I totally understand that. And I know that your time in March and April was really important to you because I saw clips of you protesting outside the White House. But before I get to that, I thought I'd ask, because I asked Juan as well about this, but when you entered the military, I only want you to speak about what you can publicly, but when you entered the military, I imagine you had some kind of idea, or maybe it wasn't a fully formed idea, but if somebody had asked you about the US supporting Israel, you would have had your own viewpoint. And then today, obviously, I imagine it's much more stark and dramatic. So, can you speak to how your view of the US support for Israel has maybe changed since your time in the military?
I guess I'm one of the lucky ones that kind of stuck by and never was kind of introduced to this propaganda surrounding Israel because I didn't know what Israel was until October 7th. I had zero knowledge of the country itself and the occupation of Palestine. I didn't even know what Palestine was. So I came at it after October 7th with a clean slate, fresh eyes, no propaganda, just trying to objectively look at the situation from both perspectives. And it's, I think without the bias, it's pretty easy to see like what's going on and what the problem is.
And something that I'll just share resonated for me about the way that you objected to the violence in Gaza was something that I was able to express as well, because the parent of a 9-month-old daughter. And I remember seeing you saying that you could see from the images that were being broadcast that these babies look like your own child. And so when I imagine that played a big part in you objecting to all of this violence as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I had a child in July last year, so he just turned 1 year old, and yeah, only 3 months roughly after he was born, October 7th kicks off, and I'm seeing images and videos of children being, you know, just decimated through this genocide, and that was an extremely heavy thing to see, and I didn't think that was something I would ever see, but that's absolutely played a huge part in my beliefs, and I don't think that this should happen to anyone, let alone Palestinians. I don't think this should happen to Americans or Chinese, Russians, anybody. And another big moment for, I guess, my motivations and beliefs was actually Uvalde, Texas, the school shooting there, and all the children that were killed there. That was a really just massive atrocity and failure on us as a country, and I've had a lot of grievances about that and surrounding the response to it, and how a lot of politicians try to, you know, pretty much play the political game even surrounding an atrocity like that. So this is no different to me. This is children are innocent and never should be a target.
I know you were on leave, so you're stationed in Rota, Spain. Is that right?
Correct.
And so you had your leave in March and April. So we're talking about 5 to 6 months after the launch of Israel's assault on Gaza. So it's a milestone, and a lot of people are looking, because it's around the half-year mark. There's a lot of reflection on what has unfolded and the complicity of the world. And so when you were on leave, I mean, I know that you were engaged in a kind of hunger strike. Can you talk about the decision to do a public hunger strike, even while you've yet to obtain this conscientious objector status?
In October, November, I had already decided I was going to get out, but I thought that my process was going to be a quiet, I'll just wait until my contract expires, or I'll apply for conscientious objector or do something to get out early. At the time, like I said, I didn't know if I would even qualify for CO, so I just decided I would ride out the rest of my contract. And I wasn't directly involved in supporting Israel, so I felt like in my position currently that it would be okay to just ride out the remainder of my contract. But then in February, Aaron Bushnell self-immolated in front of the Israeli embassy, and that kind of got me a lot more motivated and kind of ignited something in me. And I was waiting to see what the response was going to be from our leaders, and nobody really said anything. Leadership didn't say anything within my own unit, within other units, even at the top of the chain. And I had waited a week, still nothing. I'd waited even 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, I just felt like they just swept it under the rug, and they just were going to try to forget about it. So I had a major issue with that, especially the fact that the Air Force or the military in general, really touts itself on, we don't leave anyone behind, or we're a family and we're all this tight knit community, and we're really not. And that showed there in the fact that they wouldn't even say his name or say that they contacted his family and sent their condolences or whatever. So yeah, I had major issues with that, and so I decided to go to DC. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I just took a lot of leave, and I met up with Code Pink initially and followed them around and kind of see how they do things, and tried to learn from them because they have a lot of experience. And after communicating with a lot of congressmen for about a week, I was like, I don't think that this is going to benefit anyone. I didn't think that I was really doing anything. So I made connections with other retired service members, Colonel Ann Wright, and Chief Master Sergeant Dennis Fritz. I met a lot of people, great connections. I got in touch with Veterans for Peace, and from there, I kind of had the support system that I needed. I reached out to all these individuals to try to figure out what I needed to do, and a lot of them had very different opinions, and I eventually just came up with the hunger strike. I didn't have much history or knowledge of history about hunger strikes, but I'm glad I went with that. I think ultimately the motivating factor for choosing that was because of the articles that were coming out at the time about the starvation that was happening in Gaza, and I really wanted to highlight that.
And then, so while you were here on leave and you were engaged in your hunger strike, I understand that you were ordered back early. Is there anything you can say about why you weren't able to complete your leave in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. So I had thought initially that it was mostly inspired due to the hunger strike itself, but I believe the actual motivating factor was me trying to start a conversation with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And this was at a hearing at the Senate, and I was with Code Pink, and I didn't know who was even speaking at this hearing. I just knew that it was Air Force involved, and so I felt like I should probably be there. And yeah, I tried to speak to him and get his attention and see if he'd like to have a conversation, and he wasn't interested and kind of gave me the cold shoulder. But I pretty much immediately following that, or a few hours after that, is when my command got notified about that incident, and then they recalled me later that day.
Not just as an outsider trying to understand, and also as a journalist, is there anything in like the Army, or sorry, the Air Force Code of Conduct, or anything that you're trained on that like says you couldn't ask a commander out in public, a question? I mean, it seems like you were probably being fairly civil.
Yeah. What the main motivating factor behind them actually going through and recalling me was how the incident was worded and phrased to my command. The liaison office for the chief of staff made it seem like I was being disrespectful to the chief of staff, and he is the highest ranking member of the Air Force. So that's kind of a big deal when your command gets notified of that. But yeah, they framed it as me being disrespectful and yelling at him, and so disrespectful to a superior is against our UCMJ, and especially when it's the highest ranking member of the Air Force. So, but again, the video's out there. They used it as evidence for my letter of reprimand that they gave me, and people can say what it is. I don't think I was being disrespectful at all. Obviously, if I was in uniform, there would be a different type of respect and I guess phrasing and how I would address him. But I wasn't. I was in civvies, so.
Like Juan Betancourt, who I spoke to, you are a part of this appeal to redress or appeal for redress, where you are encouraging others in the military to contact their members of Congress. I know you just said that your conversations with them were a bit eye-opening, if not frustrating, that they weren't going anywhere. But that being said, there's a tremendous tradition of soldiers contacting those in Congress and letting them know how they feel about wars. Can you say a little bit about being part of this tradition of U.S. military resistance and dissent, and how important that is to you?
Honestly, when I went to DC and I kind of started protesting, I wasn't aware of the history behind dissent within the ranks. That was not something I knew about. So I was actually really nervous that I was going to get quite severe punishment for doing what I did. And so far, honestly, hasn't been as severe as I thought, nearly as severe. But yeah, the appeal for redress is really important, and the history behind it with Iraq. It's really I'm honored to be a part of it. I'm honored to be kind of in the footsteps of these great people in our past, and even just being a conscientious objector and the history behind that. And then the hunger strike I did and being part of that history. So there's a lot of rich and deep history behind all these actions that I'm actually extremely proud that I'm a part of. And the appeal for redress, me and Juan, to an extent, we have our involvement in it, and we work to bring this out. And but ultimately, we're just asking other people to exercise their rights, which is not against UCMJ. I think a lot of service members are kind of scared to opt into certain things. And as far as like protesting or voicing your grievances or being a part of anything, like this is a very low risk type of action. And if any risk at all, like, you have the right to use your First Amendment and speak to your representative. So there's nothing wrong in doing that. And that's why me and Juan are trying to encourage people to do so.
So what happens with you? I didn't actually ask one, so this will be of interest. What do you do while you're waiting? How's the chain of command handle somebody who is seeking conscientious objector status?
Yeah, so they probably would have, if I had not protested, they probably would have either kept me in my position, because I'm not in a combative role. Like I don't have a gun or anything. So they either would have kept me there or moved me to a support position which I was actually already in prior to my protest. So that's more than likely what they would have done. Currently, for my specific case, they just kind of have me doing uh, menial work around the unit, just to keep me busy while I'm in. But I'm not connected to ops in any way. So
It's been really good to talk with you and hear your story and what you're going through. And I admire your courage because it takes a lot of risk. And like you say, I mean, it's not this situation, but there is a lot of stigma that comes in the military where it's like this kind of thing. You don't probably like when you entered the military. I don't imagine you were trained and advised that there was this conscientious objector status. If they're expecting you're joining, that you want to be here, so you're not going to be leaving. And then I also know that, as far as like going through an internal channel to speak with your chain of command, there are supposed to be ways that you could speak. I mean, this isn't your situation, but if you were a whistleblower, there's supposed to be a way that you could share what you saw in your unit. But it's not always the case that those people are advised of those processes either. So I respect your courage in taking this step.
thank you.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. Once again, I'm Kevin Gosztola, podcast host and journalist at the Dissenter newsletter. And thank you for tuning into this show. This was one of the more moving episodes that I was able to put together in the history of the podcast. It meant a lot to me to have the opportunity to sit down and speak with both Juan and Larry. And thank you to Veterans for Peace for connecting me with them. I was interested in the appeal for redress or appeal to redress campaign that is ongoing, that Veterans for Peace is supporting, where they encourage military officers who are enlisted currently to contact members of Congress and U.S. senators to say that they object to U.S. support for Israel's assault on Gaza. And did not know a whole lot about what it takes to seek conscientious objector status. Well, I knew that there were military conscientious objectors that has existed. That's been part of GI resistance, but I had no idea how long it takes and what you have to do to apply to become a conscientious objector. So I thank Larry and Juan for improving my understanding of how someone distinguishes themselves as a conscientious objector. And you're signing a contract when you enter the military. The military basically owns you. It can be difficult to leave until your term is up, until your contract is up. They're not going to let you just walk away. And this sacrifice, this act of courage on their part, as I said to both of them, is extraordinary and it's honorable what they're doing. So with that, I just encourage you to become a subscriber, sign up for the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, and help keep this independent show going if you like this type of interviews. And then we'll be back soon with another show.